The fate of humanity's place in the galaxy came down to a form, 17 pages, section 7C, and a number so large the computer couldn't hold it. Kate Mercer was on page 9 when the Veoth ambassador began his 40th minute of speech about humanity's potential. She did not look up, she turned to page 10. The hall of the Galactic Council was built by beings with strong opinions about ceilings, 40 meters high, curving inward at the edges in a way that dragged the eye upward whether it wanted to go or not. The walls glowed with a sourceless, vague significance, pale mineral composite lit from within, every surface bouncing light back at a slightly different angle. Kate had been here 11 times in 3 years. The room tried to make her feel small every single time. She let it try. She had things to file. Page 11 asked for fleet composition by class. She picked up her stylus and worked through it carefully. She was the kind of person who filled in every field, including the optional ones, because the forms were designed by someone who thought every field mattered, and she was inclined to give that person the benefit of the doubt. Leon Holt leaned in from the chair to her right. Should we be listening to this? I am listening, Kate said. I'm also on page 11. I can do 2 things. Leon sat back. He had been her aide for just over 2 years. In that time he had learned several things about Kate Mercer, that she finished everything she started, that she was never late, that she was always right, and that arguing with her while she was doing paperwork was an activity with no return on investment. He folded his hands and watched the ambassador speak. The Narath situation had been building for 3 months. It started quietly, the way the worst things always do. A border monitoring station went offline, not destroyed, not attacked, simply offline, reporting nothing, responding to nothing. That happens sometimes in deep space for reasons having nothing to do with aggression. The council logged it and waited, then a cargo corridor used by 4 species was quietly redirected. No announcement, no explanation, no authority cited. Ships simply woke one morning to find new coordinates in their navigation data. Then a colony world in the outer Pelari territories received a message from the Narath government, framed as a formal greeting, containing within that greeting a detailed assessment of the colony's population, resources, and distance from Pelari defense installations. The council convened emergency sessions. Twice, both times produced resolutions urging continued dialogue and expressing collective concern. The resolutions were drafted, voted on, transmitted, and ignored. This time they wanted contributions. Every species with military capacity was asked to complete a contribution assessment form: ship classes, armament categories, deployment timelines, strategic reserve configurations. The assembled totals would form a unified response force. The theory was simple. The Narath would see the number, calculate the cost of their current trajectory, and choose a different one. Kate had received the form 4 days ago. She filled it out with the same care she brought to every official document. She checked the figures 3 times, one more than she usually checked anything, because she had a reasonable suspicion about what the form's intake system had been built to handle. The system rejected her first submission of Section 7C with an automated response. Value exceeds input parameters. Please verify entry. She verified the entry. It was correct. She resubmitted with a short note attached. This is not a typo. The system accepted the second submission and issued a confirmation receipt with one flag marked beside her entry. Value pending verification. She had turned back to page 12 and kept going. Now she was on page 15, and the ambassador was rapping toward his conclusion. She could tell because he had reached the part where the word together appeared in every other sentence, which was his rhetorical signal for a closing argument. Leon was watching the contribution display board at the front of the chamber, where submission totals appeared in real time as delegations filed their forms. Danaki are in, he said quietly. 8 dreadnoughts, 1,200 support vessels. Good. The Veoth submitted 12 dreadnoughts, 340 capital ships. A pause. I saw our submission just posted. Then Kate, she was on page 16. The board had stopped. She looked up. The display had frozen mid-update. A technician near the side of the chamber was at the control panel, moving with the focused expression of someone troubleshooting something they had not expected to troubleshoot. The board flickered, resumed, froze again, then it loaded. Next to the human delegation's entry, a number appeared. The Dranaki representative across the aisle turned his head. Read the number, read it again, did not look away from the board. Kate looked at it, checked it against her own tablet, found it accurate, and returned to page 16. Is that right? Leon said. His voice had gone quiet in the way of someone who wasn't sure what volume was appropriate for the situation. Yes, she said. Page 17 covered resolution protocols for ambiguous engagement scenarios. Kate found it the most interesting section of the whole document. By the time she signed the final page and set her stylus down, 4 delegations had stopped what they were doing and were staring at the board. The Veoth ambassador had abandoned his conclusion entirely and was standing motionless near the Chelari section, staring at the number with the expression of a man who has measured a room 3 times and gotten 3 different answers and is beginning to suspect the room is the problem. Kate closed her tablet, finished the last of her coffee, cold. It tasted like the idea of coffee rather than the actual thing. She stood, straightened her jacket, nodded to Leon, and walked out of the hall of the Galactic Council with 17 completed pages and the clean, unremarkable calm of a person who had done exactly what was asked of them, nothing extra. Nothing missing. In the corridor outside, she sent one message to Earth Fleet Command, form submitted. Expect contact within 48 hours. She was off by 45. The contact came in 3. Administrator Vale Toth was 312 years old. He had been administrating council processes since before humanity had figured out orbital mechanics. His carapace had gone translucent near the joints, and his eyes held the quality of very old, very precise instruments, slow to focus and impossible to fool. He had met Kate once at a formal reception. He had asked her 2 questions about Earth's southern hemisphere agricultural systems, and remembered both answers 6 months later. He was not a person who asked questions he did not intend to use. He had never called her directly before. Ambassador Mercer, he said. His voice carried the quality of a person choosing each word like stepping stones across a narrow stream. The Council's administrative office has completed a preliminary review of your delegation's contribution submission. Good, she said. There appears to be a discrepancy. She took a sip of coffee. What kind? A numerical one. A pause long enough to be significant. The figure you entered in Section 7C appears to have exceeded the processing parameters of our intake system. Leon had put his tablet down. He was watching her face. What parameters are those? She said. Field was designed to accept values between 1 and 9,999 units. Your entry, he stopped, started again. The system was unable to render it. The output field displayed a series of query symbols. I included a note with the resubmission, Kate said. It said the entry was not a typo, a silence, the kind that waits. Yes, he said, we saw the note, which is why I'm calling rather than issuing a correction request through standard channels. Could you provide the intended value verbally for the record? She told him. The same way she would tell someone a flight number or a street address, plainly, without preamble. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. The previous one had been a person choosing words. This one was a person doing something else entirely, recalibrating, adjusting an assumption that had been so long established they had stopped noticing it was an assumption. I want to confirm I understand your classification system correctly, Vale Toth said carefully. By dreadnought, you mean? She walked him through it. She used the definitions from the form itself because those were the agreed terms. Class IV or above. Minimum 4 kilometers in length. Armament sufficient for sustained planetary siege operations. Independent logistics and resupply capacity. Full operational autonomy for a minimum of 18 months. Yes, those ships, exactly those. And the figure you provided represents current active inventory. As of last quarter's count, she said. Updated monthly. There's some variance depending on maintenance, rotations and construction schedules, but the figure is accurate to within approximately 300 units. Silence. 300 units of variance, he said slowly, like someone repeating the dimensions of a room they'd just learned was much larger than the building containing it. Give or take, she said. The construction rings operate on independent scheduling. He asked after a moment how many construction rings there were. She told him that too. The call went quiet long enough that she finished 2 more bites of eggs and drank half her coffee before he spoke again. Ambassador Mercer, he said at last, I will be routing your submission to the Security Committee for manual review. This is standard procedure for any entry that requires a system override. I want to assure you this is not a reflection of any concern regarding your delegation's conduct. I understand, Kate said. I would also note informally, he continued, that the other contributing delegations have submitted without incident, and that your submission represents a pause. A significant point of discussion among my colleagues. I imagine it does, Kate said. She thanked him for calling. She set the comm down. Leon was looking at her with the expression he used when he had been presented with information that required several minutes of quiet processing before any response was possible. Security Committee, he said. Yes, the full panel, 14 species. She picked up her fork. Admiral Shorvac chairs the Danaki seat. I know, he's not historically a being who responds to unexpected information with warmth and open arms. Doesn't need to respond with warmth, Kate said. He needs to understand what he's looking at. Once he understands, his response will adjust accordingly. She pushed back from the table. That's the point. Formal request arrived in Kate's office the next morning. In-person clarification before the Security Committee at the human delegation's earliest convenience. She checked her schedule. Thursday was open. Vale Toth's response came back in 11 minutes. Thursday was available for all committee members. The Grand Hall of Security Review, last convened in full session 11 years ago for a territorial dispute between 2 established member species, was also available. Everyone, it appeared, had cleared their Thursdays. Bring documentation, Vale Toth added at the end of his message. Kate replied that she would bring the first 40 pages of the primary asset index. A pause before his response came back. The first 40 pages. The full index runs somewhat long, she said. We can discuss how the committee would like to handle the remainder once we're in session. She sent Leon to the print office. He came back 30 minutes later looking like a man who had carried something heavier than expected, which was accurate, because the 40-page preliminary brief and the separately bound index summary together came to just under 2 kilograms. Thursday, the Grand Hall of Security Review was smaller than the main council chamber. The ceiling was lower, the walls tighter, every dimension calibrated to communicate that whatever was discussed here was too serious to require a grand setting. Long tables in a horseshoe, the human delegation at the open end, facing 14 delegations in a curved row, 23 officials, the Cellari in environment suits, the regulators emitting their low-frequency hum that never quite became background noise, Admiral Shorvac standing at the far right of the arc. Danaki did not sit during sessions where their assessment of the situation was not yet settled. Kate's briefing files called it readiness signaling. She noted it without comment. She placed the documentation package on the table. It made a solid, dense sound. The questions came in waves. The Pellari suggested very carefully that perhaps humanity had applied a different classification system. Cross-species military taxonomy presented genuine translation challenges. A reasonable misunderstanding. Kate said the definitions she used were the form's own definitions. She had applied no broader interpretation. The Pellari neck tissue shifted further into yellow-orange. A mid-tier councillor representing the Sarandai asked about the construction rings. 6 active rings, were all 6 currently operational, or did that figure include rings under development or awaiting resource allocation? 6 active rings, Kate said, all producing at current capacity. Sarandai councillor exchanged a short word with the delegate beside her. Then, and these rings are operating because we needed more ships, Kate said. The Cellari delegation suits registered a temperature drop of approximately 6 degrees over the next 30 seconds. Kate had been in enough meetings with Cellari to know this was not a mechanical issue. Their internal temperature responses to information were involuntary and precise, which made them the most honest communicators in the room. Even when they said nothing aloud, Shorvac had not spoken, he was still standing. The quality of his stillness was not patience. It was the specific, focused stillness of a military mind running calculations. When the other delegations finished, he spoke. Ambassador Mercer. His voice was low and flat, built for large rooms. My delegation requests a live verification under Protocol 7. Physical confirmation is required when any single submission exceeds standard projection thresholds by 20% or more. Your submission exceeds that threshold considerably. We invoke the protocol. Of course, Kate said, a sample deployment, representative of the submitted figure, neutral coordinates confirmed by the chair. His pale eyes held hers. Minimum of 10% of the submitted figure. Agreed, Kate said. She picked up her comm. The neutral deep space location was 2 light towers from the council station. The observation feed came up on the wall display behind Vale Toth's position. The first FTL emergence signatures appeared like lights being switched on in a dark building, precise, organized, each one resolving from the brief blue-white flash of transition into the solid, enormous shape of a human dreadnought holding position. The scale indicator in the feed's lower corner adjusted once, then again, recalibrating for the actual dimensions of what it was now being asked to represent. The room watched, Kate watched the room. The Pellari representative leaned forward, not a deliberate movement, but the body responding to something the mind was still catching up to. The Sarandai councillor pressed both hands flat on the table surface, fingers spread, as if verifying the table was still there. The second wave arrived. Mori ships holding formation. The first wave adjusted slightly to accommodate them, the whole arrangement perfectly ordered. The kind of order that comes from either extraordinary training or extraordinary numbers. In this case, it was both. The third wave, Shorvac took 1 step toward the display screen and stopped himself 1 step. His instincts had moved before his discipline caught up. He stood very still after that, but the step had happened, and Kate had seen it, and she suspected he knew she had seen it. The Vaoth High Administrator was counting under his breath. She couldn't hear him, but she could see his lips moving. He counted for a long time. He stopped at a number she could not identify, but the point at which he stopped suggested he had reached the boundary of what counting felt like an appropriate response to. The ships kept coming. The display system began to struggle. It had been built for fleet reviews of the kind the Galaxy had previously produced, designed for numbers that resolved into individual hull shapes at reasonable viewing distance. The more distant vessels began rendering as compressed light clusters, bright masses at the edge of the frame where individual shapes were no longer possible. The system was doing everything it had been designed to do. It was not enough for what it was being asked to show. At 15,000, the UVO's delegate set his stylus down. At 28,000, one of Shorvac's aides made a sound that was not a word in any language Kate had been briefed on. It was the sound of a mind making a very rapid adjustment to a very large assumption. At 38,000, the Pellari neck tissue went a color Kate had no reference for in her briefing materials. She filed the observation for later. At 44,000, the Sarandai councillor leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a person doing mathematics they had not planned to do today. At 51,000, the deployment completed. Kate checked the figure against her briefing sheet, looked up at the committee. 51,412 vessels, she said. That represents 10% of Class IV assets and above, as requested under Protocol 7. The room absorbed this in the kind of silence that has actual physical weight. Shorvac turned from the display slowly, turned like a person making sure their expression was fully under control before it became visible. He looked at Kate. Percent, he said. Yes, Class IV and above. Does not include Classes I through III, she said. Does not include the Home System Reserve Fleet, which operates under a separate command structure and was not part of the contribution assessment calculation. I also want to be transparent. 6 deep space construction rings are currently in active operation, and their quarterly output will be reflected in the next assessment update. If the committee would like those production projection figures, I can have them to you by end of week. Nobody responded to the offer about projection figures. Kate picked up her coffee cup. She had brought it from the delegation quarters. She had not touched it since sitting down because she had been counting ships on the feed and had lost track somewhere above 30,000. She drank it cold. The full council inquiry opened on a Tuesday morning, which Kate had always thought was an honest day of the week. Not the optimism of Monday, not the accelerating certainty of Wednesday. Tuesday was a day that knew it was in the middle of something and was not pretending otherwise. She arrived 7 minutes early, 42 delegations, every seat filled, every delegation already briefed, already having seen the deployment record on the long-range observation feeds. The room was as fully prepared as a room can be to ask a question whose answer it has already partially seen and still cannot fully